Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in bountiful Bakersfield, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today we're excited to have back on the show a good friend to the show, Dan Moore, who's been a pupil on the way of return since 1971, particularly resonating with the Hermetic Kabbalah in general and its Rosicrucian approach in particular. And he's a member of the Fraternity of Hidden Light. He's been on this show many times to share with us his great knowledge and experience with Kabbalah, alchemy, the tarot cards. So today we're excited to have him come on and talk about the origins of Kabbalah, as well as some other aspects of it. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our show. It's really great to have you guys with us again. Next week, we have a brand new guest. He's astrologer and esoteric scholar, Ronnie Pontiac, and we are super excited to have him on. Just an interesting character. I think you're going to absolutely love meeting him. And then we'll be into October, so we've got all our paranormal friends and Wiccans and so forth, those great Halloween season shows that we always do. And get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. And while you're there, if you can afford to, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. Helps us cover a little bit of our cost, but the most important thing, click like and subscribe and help us grow our channel. Tell your friends about us, and that really means a lot to us. And thank you to all of the fans and folk that have helped us to grow the show. We really, truly appreciate it. So I'm excited to hear what Dan has to say about Kabbalah, near and dear to us since our book is coming out in October, where we use that for tarot. So I'm going to kick it back to you guys. So take it away, Krista and Dan.
Great. Thank you, Michael, and welcome back to the show, Dan.
Thank you so much, Krista, and you too, Michael. It's wonderful to be back, particularly on a beautiful, what I would call a nice fall day here in California.
Oh, yes, it's much cooler today in Bakersfield. It was amazing, the temperature difference. So unfortunately, I think it's still going to go up in about a week, but we're going to enjoy this break from the heat. So let's start with, one of the things I have found with just my little bit of study into the origins and history of Kabbalah is it seems to be a little murky at times, but interesting, really very, very interesting. It's one of those histories that has some real characters in it. But let's start with the earliest that you know of in terms of the origins.
Well, when you look at the material itself, just based on how it uses symbology and its philosophic emphases and stuff like that, you can tell that it pretty much had an origin that we could say was from the Middle East, largely with a lot of Alexandrian influence in it. And so we're talking about a Greco-Egyptian and Persian influences for what eventually became Kabbalah. So throughout all of these ancient cultures, East or West, there were the mysteries. And this is the thing that draws all of us. The idea that one could find out the meaning and the origin and essence of life itself by being initiated and studying the various manifestations of the divine, of which you and I are one, and as all beings are, and as creation is one in the sense of the book of nature being a first Bible, if you will, a first sacred scripture. So from this, out of it, I believe, came in a condensed form, a kind of philosophic distillation of what we would recognize today as Kabbalah. And I would have to say that a large amount of its symbolism is pretty much based on the really metropolitan character of Alexandria during the first 3 centuries leading up to about 70 or so, the Battle of Actium and that kind of thing. Because here you had the first time that all these cultures started to merge and grow together, and they had symbols which were picked from each other. And if you look perceptively, you can say, hey, there's all the symbolism that I'm studying here in the Western tradition, whether it's alchemical or tarot or what have you, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you can see how this is. And it's kind of interesting, if things had teetered a little differently, you would have had Alexandria, which was a tremendous economic power. They had as many people as Rome and a large port. But you see, Rome was the one who went around and conquered all of Europe and that kind of thing. Hence, the whole history comes down to us of the Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic Church that we were talking about and so forth. It would have been slightly different had it gone through Alexandria. They didn't quite think the same way.
Mm.
And that spirit of integration and mysticism forms a large part of what we will call the way of return in the great work.
So it seems from at least the notable figures in Kabbalah's history, it, however, has a very strong connection to the Jewish people. And even though it's been, of course, taken by other groups of people at this, even like earlier than this century, but the figures that kind of are mentioned, they often seem quite interesting. A lot of the early figures in Kabbalah. So maybe it'd be interesting to hear what you think about some of the figures you think were important or you found had an impact on you through some of the main periods of the evolution of Kabbalah.
Well, if you're going to start with the oldest part of it, you have to look at the Torah and what is the Bible itself, the Old Testament, because at one time it wasn't old; it was the only Testament, and there are a great many things in there to look at, which are very telling. One of them is like the Old Testament talks about Yisrael, the Hebrews were also known as Israel. And Israel literally means to triumph, to contend and to triumph with God. In a sense, it represents the struggle we all have philosophically with, well, what is God? What is the creator? What is the divine? And what is my relationship with that? Okay, and that's, in that sense, that's the modern mystical idea of Israel. And that's why Paul Foster Case talked about the true spiritual Israel. You don't have to be a Jew to be an Israelite or to follow this path of return. So the way he got his dream is Jacob, he winds up wandering a bit. So he's out in the middle of the desert, like someone who came down the line after him, Moses, would be. And he goes to sleep there, and he has this dream. And in the dream, he is struggling with this angel, and the angel, he says, I won't let you go until you give me a blessing. And the angel says, I will change your name to Israel, and this is what it means, now leave me. And from that experience, Jacob perceives this enormous ladder that touches the surface of the earth, that goes way up into the sky, and there are angels ascending and descending simultaneously on this ladder. And then eventually he wakes up. Now remember, he's in the middle of nowhere. And he says, how full of God is this place? And I knew it not. So there's the first thing about the unification of interconnection, the invisible interconnection that we have with all of life, and that it can be experienced in these kinds of transcendental ways. And here he was having dream consciousness, which a lot of that is pretty much picked up on in Genesis because of him and because of Yosef. So changed. And that's the idea that, I want to do kind of what Moses did when he climbs up on the mountain and he sees that bush burning with the divine fire and it's completely unconsumed. I want to experience the divine firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, causes you a lot of trouble, particularly as you go back in time and you say, oh, no, it's just the church and the clergy that you can experience the divine. Don't go out on your own now. And of course, people who did this, even though this was a way of developing many latent potentials and realizing our inherent divinity, that they had to practice this largely in secret.
Well, wasn't the early Kabbalah mostly oral, like passed on through the oral tradition? Was there not a lot of the written?
Well, not only is that true, but it was true about a lot of the Bible. So what we have, and this will explain the evolution here, and I'm going to take about a minute to do this, and this will explain a lot of things. Okay, so in Judaism, they have the Torah. That's a really big deal. That's the first 5 books of Moses. The rest of it is called the writings and the prophecies, and that's the rest of the Old Testament. They also have something called the Apocrypha. This is for the Old Testament, which are hidden books. And they have something else called the pseudo-apocrypha, which means the hidden books. And none of these books are in the canon, okay? So you have all of that, but then the realization is made that, look, there's a lot of oral tradition that goes along with these written stories. But those who remember at the beginning, the numbers are thinning. So they wrote all this stuff down, which was the rest of the Bible now, okay? And this is called the Mishnah. And the Mishnah has this stuff in it, like if you saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, the thing about there being nothing but this white dust and sand inside the ark, right? Well, the Mishnah explains how that got in there.
Oh.
You have to read it to know what it is, and I'm not going to take the time now to tell you. But anyway, that's the thing, that this stuff was in here, and they would see it and continue along with this tradition. So, you're right. And you've got to remember, too, that the Hebrews or the Israelites, they were a collection of 12 different tribes of people. And all that has symbolic significance as we're talking about the zodiac and the development of us into complete human beings throughout many, 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 many incarnations. Anyway, so all of those kinds of things, looking at that and what other people have done with it, and more than just individuals, it's kind of like the influence on history. Now, people ask me, well, why are there 10 lights on the tree of life, right? One of the things Manly Hall points out is that this is the oldest human computer we've got.
Oh, that's true.
For one thing, okay, calculator that we could use. The other thing is that it shows us a complete structure of all and nothing. Where we go from one, the unity, to the unity in the zero, which is another one. And a lot of this is not that easy to understand unless you've done a little studying in sacred geometry, which was largely influenced by the Greek mysteries. So you have the Greek mysteries there in Alexandria, you have the Egyptian ones, you have Kabbalah being practiced, and by the way, they would say, so we were talking about the Old Testament, then there's the Mishnah, and there's commentary on the Mishnah, which is written around the sides of it, and that together is called the Gemara. And the Gemara, all these nice volumes, that's the Talmud. There's a whole Bible there. Everything is told at that point. Okay? But what they say about this stuff, well, you've got the writings, which is kind of looking at the garments someone wears, okay? And then you have the kind of ethical precepts about it, the philosophy about what is good for the individual and for the group and whatnot. And that's kind of like looking at the body, okay? So you have the literal aspect and you have this philosophic aspect. Then you finally get to the spiritual aspect, and that transcends the body. But Kabbalah is called the soul of the law. Okay, the essence of the law. And talk about that. There are these different levels of interpreting all these writings, and the deepest level is called Sod, which literally means secret. The secret level.
So is it true that the earliest book that people consider to be part of the history of Kabbalah is the Book of Creation? Is that the earliest known written book?
We're talking Sefer Yetzirah?
Yes.
Yeah, that means formation, actually.
Oh, sorry, got that wrong.
It's the newest one, It's the oldest one that has yet to be discovered. That doesn't mean there aren't stuff rummaging around somewhere, who knows where, that is actually older. But this one has a funny history to it in that schools of esoteric practice who develop this knowledge then wish to share it, but they have to do it in a roundabout way. Special publishers that write books, and maybe you pass around manuscripts or something like this. Now I'm talking about the 13, 14, 15, 1600s, that area of time. And there would be this thing, and that's probably where the literal aspect of mouth to ear comes from for Kabbalah. It means mouth to ear. Well, the word actually means, its literal interpretation is receptivity. Receptivity to what? Well, it's to the currents of the hidden light, the essence of being itself, the music of the spheres, as the Pythagoreans like to call it. That's what you're being receptive to, and it will, in fact, develop your receptivity to do that and much more.
So it's kind of built into the tradition that it's going to evolve in ways that it perhaps other religions could or other teachings could, but they're a little more static. Whereas Kabbalah, it seems like you have it kind of built into the word itself, this word receptivity, which is, could be interpreted different ways, but certainly allows for more innovation.
Well, I think there are different ways of approach that people have. That's why when I talk about Hermetic Kabbalah, like the course, little plug there, I like to say that I don't want this to be competitive, because it's not. It's complementary. Whatever you're studying, you're going to go along these certain major features, if you will, like if you were going to take a voyage around the world. You're going to go by certain things. It's just inevitable. And these things will happen to you, and you can get there by itself, or you can have this augmentation, which maybe allows you to see it in a broader perspective. That would be the only advantage at all, is that it would allow you to see things in a broader perspective, because Kabbalah is intent on having unity. Whatever it is in the levels of consciousness there, and there's 32 of them or whatnot, is to be one with it, to really know it. And that's why they used, Adam knew his wife in sexual congress. I mean, really intimately involved in everything.
Well, it's interesting too that a lot of, I guess, modern people initially are introduced to Kabbalah through the diagram of the tree of life. That seems to be a very well-known way to initially see it, and that's the way I heard about it. And I'm not alone, I'm sure. But I think I read somewhere someone's opinion about how it's also the different 10 different consciousnesses. It's all different aspects of the one God, and it has a kind of pagan element to it.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, that's something that is kind of, let's kind of skip over that. When you first read about creation in Genesis, the word that is just translated as God is actually Elohim. And that is a plural of a divine word, Eloah, which means a goddess, essentially. Okay. So there's 7 of them. They made all of creation. And that is that idea of being able to see that. And I think this is where some people philosophically interpret, one of the 10 Commandments, you shall have no gods before me. Gods after me, I don't mind. But before me, because you have to understand it's part of the unity. And these are all aspects of me. And I remember reading something by Manly Hall when people would say, they're looking at the strange and sometimes grotesque sculptures that are the deities of Hinduism. There's one of them that had many heads on it. And so the fellow was asking, why do they do that? Why would they do that? Not that Manly was, but he wrote about this encounter. And I said, well, if everything is one, is not every head God's head? You know, that's how we show it. Okay, and that's the idea behind all the arms and all this different kind of stuff. And was to show this plurality in what essentially was ultimately a unity.
It gets complicated.
Well, it's complicated, but there are novel ways to think about it because we deal with it every day. Light is just light. It's white light. But when you put colors on it, you have various aspects or qualities of that light coming through. And that's the idea. You and me are the specialized waveform pattern of the cosmic broadcaster. Okay? And that's us. And that's kind of the way I like to look at it, because then you can say, well, hey, you know, in this room right now, you and me, there are pictures and sounds and all this stuff. It's an invisible. And unless you get certain equipment with certain materials, made in a certain way, alchemy, with this magic force called electricity, which we really don't know what it is, but we know how it works, so we can work with it, that you can actually see these pictures and hear these sounds. We call it what? Television. You know, you and I grew up with it.
Mm-hmm. Still seems magical to me.
Yeah, it's magic. You have to think about it that way, because that's ultimately what it is based on, in the same sense that the Bible says you and I are images of the divine. You know, that's an image of the divine. That's how it presented itself. And by golly, it works. But there's even more yet.
So, you know, talking about sort of the hieroglyph of the tree of life, it seems like that is the most well-known, popular way to study it. Though when you go back and look at some of the books that are part of the history, some of them are very, very difficult, I find, to read. And then you also have to look for translations for some of them. You have to decide what's a good translation if you don't read the language. So there's this, to me, with Kabbalah, and also in sort of the occult movement, there is a very, very intellectual approach sometimes, and which doesn't always seem to be completely necessary at the beginning. So in other words, there's ways that you can approach the tree, it seems like, that works. But I would like to know sort of your thoughts about how that can be integrated in a way that a modern person could understand and utilize.
Well, I would think, you know, you have to look at it kind of as a form of geometry and mathematics, but one that was created by the classical mind that saw the world as a flat plane, and, you know, there's the dome of the heavens above that. And if you can think of it as like a form of mathematics, or as we like to call it sometimes, the blueprint of creation, it's a way of beginning to look at stuff and see the dynamic that's happening. It's a flexible model, because every one of those 10 circles has another tree inside of it. And then every one of those little trees and their little circles have another tree ad infinitum. So it's in that way, it's almost like calculus. Calculus is very much similar to that. So we have all of this stuff, and this is going to be kind of weak philosophically, but we don't have a lot of time, and there are more elaborate things. But let's do this for interconnecting stuff, because that's what the tree of life is. It makes these interconnections for you. Okay. All the fascination about Mars, it's gone on forever. Then the first landers on Mars that we got up there successfully were, what were they called? I think they were called Discovery. Anyway, the big thing is they had this little tiny scoop on them to scoop up some of the soil and drop it into the little chemical laboratory that would heat the soil up and then analyze what it was made of. So we know that through the Hermetic correspondence that Mars is related to iron. And the the reason Mars is so red is because it has a high amount of iron oxide in its crust.
Hmm.
Now, how did they know that? They say, oh, that was just a coincidence. No, it wasn't. It was a way they knew of verifying nature without having to build hundreds of millions of dollars of hardware and send it up there. They simply knew it because of how the system worked. Let's try another one. This time, we're going to switch from science to mythology and get an idea of the mystery of Excalibur, King Arthur's singing sword. So the sword is given to the king, I think through Merlin, but he acquires it from the Lady of the Lake. Okay? And now this is very interesting to me because it sounds very much like this highest aspect of soul, giving forth the sword. Here's the Lady of the Lake, all of those maternal symbologies. You have the aspect that there is a lake or a body of water, and Bina is also known as the Great Sea, and she puts forth this sword. Well, interestingly enough, the path of Zayn connects Bina all the way down to the heart center here at Tiferet, and Zayn is a sword. So here you have this thing about the whole dynamic there, if you want to get into that, and we have been given all these symbolic keys, what's behind Zayn, what's behind that card of the lovers and so forth, and what's up here at the Temple of the Masters, and the fact that the heart of the king is here and is given that sword. Anyway.
So you're basically, for people that might not know much about the Kabbalah, you're talking about the correspondences with the different spheres and how they can relate to, like, with Mars.
Bina,
and
the 17th path, I believe, and number 6, Tiferet. And they have all that major symbolism of the sword and how it's given forth. And it just happens to connect with the heart. See, this is how it works. It just works.
Well, there is one thing that is confusing when you first enter the Kabbalah and the correspondences is if you look at least at the tarot books in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they did not all agree on what Hebrew letter corresponded with what path. I know Pappas is quite different in his book. I don't have it memorized, but it doesn't mean someone's right or wrong, it seems like. And there did seem to come a sort of unification of it through the Golden Dawn, in that there's more people that kind of follow something similar to the Golden Dawn, maybe a couple cards differently. So how do people wrap their mind around that idea that there was initially some different ideas about correspondences, and this goes with this particular Sephirah, and this goes with that?
Yeah, again, and like you said, it's not a right or a wrong. You have to look at it as a matter of approach and how the various schools approached the subject, the work. So the English school was the one that, most of us follow here as far as the initial set of correspondences go, right? The others are the continental school. So you have a swap out between Olive for the Fool and Shin for, the Last Judgment.
Judgment, yeah.
And that was a major thing Eliphas LeVay did. And Case even writes about it. He says he wasn't wrong. He says he was simply showing another aspect of what this energy consciousness principle being is. And that's what's happening there. So you need to look at that. And in fact, in classical Kabbalah, I mean by that Judaic Kabbalah, when they talk about the Hebrew alphabet, and those letters are sacred. They're the creative forces of creation. They're the building blocks of creation, okay? But they say that they both have a positive and negative aspect, just like the Force. Oh my, I don't know what that is.
That was really interesting. The balloons just went by over Dan. For
a bunch of balloons just went by.
Listening in.
Anyway.
That's funny.
So this is something that you can take a look at and see how these things are and how they work. It is a different perspective, but it has the same kind of qualities that we expect of modern mathematics, i.e., and able to predict certain things, right? And to be able to theorize about others. So it works very much like that. And frankly, I don't see what's wrong. I can use my symbolism, or you can use, what you get taught in college.
Well, I think like you're saying, it's
If they
all
both
about
work.
if you approach it and it works and you test it out, because one of the things that Michael and I have found with Kabbalah is testing it out is how you learn what works. It's one of those things that probably of all the mystical traditions I've ever followed, I don't know, I felt like it had an effect early on. Like you could test it out and see this is working, this isn't working. And there's this, even though it's so esoteric at times, there's this hugely practical side of the Kabbalah, which I know you take advantage of, and I think we have, but I think sometimes the modern world doesn't even know about it unless they are working in a school, perhaps like Boda, where they do have practical applications. That's what I really like about it. It has so many like levels you can approach it, and it's all there in one sort of system.
And that's why I say it'll complement anything. It's meant to do that. So you can be a Hindu and be a Kabbalist, or a Rosicrucian, if you will, or something like that. That was the idea, that there was this universality, and tribalistic peoples accepted that kind of idea. Native American Indians said, "Oh, we believe about your Jesus and the second coming and all of that. Here is also our belief about white buffalo woman and what Wakantanka is, meaning power and stuff like that." So they could accept these both, and beginning, well, how do you do that? And the point is that they did not bother to judge the form that truth came to them in. They merely would accept it and try and understand it. And that's a big deal.
I like that. Now, it seems like the early part of Kabbalah, women were not really allowed to study it. And it seems, that's not uncommon with a lot of the religions, or it did seem like there were some rules about even when to approach it. You ought to be a certain age, and not that that's necessarily a bad thing either, but it now is just so open that anyone can study at any time. And also the other thing I'd like you to sort of comment on is, it seems like I just reading a little bit about the history, it seems like there's aspects in Judaism that doesn't really respect that Kabbalah. They think they're a little nuts, the mystical, but I think that's probably true of most mystical paths, that there's this sort of, okay, this is the way it goes. And then there's, the Gnosis path, and there's the one that isn't. So it was my impression, I got that a little bit, that there's certain, people that don't really think Kabbalah is necessarily a legitimate side to Judaism.
Yeah, well, if they're old and they're Orthodox, they will accept it. However, they'll say, the way the Goyim do Kabbalah, that's not kosher. You'll get that attitude too. So there's all these varying degrees of stuff like that. And I think it just depends. There are people who want to delve with their mysterious feelings and their hidden aspects, but they also have to live in the world. And once upon a time, talking about Judaism, there was a book that Dennis Prager and another guy wrote, I believe, called 8 Questions About Judaism. And the first one starts out, is belief in God rational? Okay. I mean, I'm right to the source here. Let's go talk about this now. And what do you think about it? And those are the kinds of things that a genuine path and the great work will have you dealing with. That's the metaphor of Moses wandering through the wilderness, what's going to go on, and so forth and whatnot, and that kind of thing. We had a lady who we've gotten to know, but helps Jan out with some stuff. And she says, I got to know what happens after I die. So, we talked about that for a bit, and why certain people look at this and look at this and that, and So it's interesting. There are no lack of opportunities that the light brings to you if it thinks you can reasonably reach someone's heart to kind of unlock a little bit of it, to
Mm.
be satisfied with a little victory. You
Oh,
know,
those are important.
those are important.
Those are very, and I think they're maybe under discussed. They're not talked about as much.
No, and that's the nice thing about doing the course, and why I tell people you got to go by the sequence. You cannot, you know, go here and then go there and go whatnot. You've got to go through the sequence this way the first time, because certain things are happening that you're not aware of most of the time.
So a lot of people don't know about the course. And this is, you're talking about the course that you offer. Maybe share a little bit about that.
Okay, it is a course that the actual lessons themselves kind of only take, there's so much to look at in Kabbalah. Only take a look at two things. And the two things that we're basically looking at is the verse relative to the path, whether it is a sphere or a path, and what that verse is, what it means, and what the translation of the words are. Then the other thing we get into is the spiritual experience of the 10 Sephirot, which is just adding on something a little bit more, because they actually represent different grades of consciousness, which a lot of that's been published to see in the Golden Dawn, see, Zelator, Theoricus, Practicus, Philosophus, and the various adept grades, and so on. So this course is a way of looking at that, getting these two levels as an introduction, plus a lot of other different things. I also like to define terms that I use that might be obscure or of another language or whatnot. So every lesson has a glossary. There are custom designed diagrams in there, because for about 10 years I liked just making my own study materials. I knew what I needed to find out, so I made the materials and then started studying them, so that I could examine the relationship and all of that kind of stuff. Anyway, so there's the whole thing. There is a little bit of practical work in it, and it will hopefully show you your latent divine abilities, which even are physiologic. And we get into that at the very last lesson. Lesson number 33.
I do remember, not the exact quote, about Aleister Crowley basically said if you studied Kabbalah, you'd know everything in the universe, that everything in the universe is contained in the concepts, whatever it is, from science to art to philosophy to physical things. And that has always really intrigued me, that idea that this is the key to creation. And it does seem, that that's possible, even though it seems improbable. I don't know. It's one of those things that it seems kind of wild, but when you work with it after a while, you begin to see how this could be possible.
Yeah, I think Crowley may have been quoting one of his favorite guys, which was Constance or Eliphas Levi, because I think he was the first one who said if there was someone, he's speaking about a prisoner, if he'd been in there and the only thing he had was a tarot deck, after several years he could speak with all this elocution and whatnot about any subject and so on and so forth. So that's the idea behind this Hermetic Kabbalah, in the sense of giving you the way to discover something, to unlock it and see how it works.
And, I can appreciate that there is a good systematic approach to understanding it. I think, however, we kind of winged it, Michael and I. We did look for a teacher that didn't quite work out at the time, the kind of teacher we wanted. And what I discovered is it sort of leads you to the next step. If you're kind of going around the wrong corner, it feels like it kind of helps you to go, a different way as a teacher in and of itself. Do you think there are like spiritual guardians connected to the tree that will help anyone that's very open-hearted and is sincere about their desire to improve or understand things.
Not so much there are guardians, but there is a guardian, and that guardian is called the Holy Guardian Angel. So the spiritual experience for Malkut at the beginning of the journey, you know, when you're introduced to the how amazing the kingdom of nature is the vision of the Holy Guardian Angel. That's the spiritual experience for that one. So, okay, what's a Holy Guardian Angel? You know, well, you know, everybody's born with one. You know, that's the first time I remember hearing. You know, and it looks over you and takes care of you and so on and so forth. What it is for our purposes in this tradition is that aspect of development and guidance that overshadows us from this personal level and puts us into life situations which further our spiritual development. And that's what the Holy Guardian Angel is. Because the next time when you get into the inner order, the order of the greater mysteries, these are the lesser ones, then you have the spiritual vision of, you know, 5 equals 6, the junior adept, and that is the knowledge of and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. It's gone on this next step. And if you look at it, you will find this as a very important, but not so much touted, if you will, aspect in any magical work. One of them is the sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage. And the significance of that work, that can be at least 6 months long, is to develop that full consciousness with the Holy Guardian Angel.
So how do you know you really have, and you're not like talking to some other delusional side of yourself?
Well, I mean, the proof is in the pudding, okay? You're constantly looking out to see what is with that. The things that can go along with it is physical stuff that happens in groups of people and whatnot. I mean, you know, I understand where you're coming from on that one, but there's been enough curious and unusual things happen that this goes on. Now, here's something that I almost hesitate to not tell it because it's like observing things. Now, our predecessors, the indigenous or First Nation peoples of this country, would say, you got to pay attention to everything. You got to look at the animals. And even if there's little ants, birds flying by, listen, they have something to tell you. Pay attention to all of that. Okay. Well, my daughter, for some reason, latched on to the image of a squirrel. And that was always a big thing with her. She had this other persona called Sneaky Squirrel, which didn't do anything malicious, but she used it at work and whatnot, and people got to know about that. So I kind of got into it. Now there's all these videos on YouTube about people who are feeding squirrels, you know, right at their windowsill.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time I saw some squirrels was they were running along the power lines. And this was a good 2 years ago, or a little bit longer. I hadn't seen any, so I was thinking about that. If I ever see some, maybe I'll leave out some nuts for them or something. That would be kind of fun to give them that. And so I had this trepidation on and off for that. And I saw some other animals, particularly a raccoon. I says, well, now I know why there aren't any squirrels around. But get this, okay? I've been kind of, a little mopey about that and whatnot. So I was watching some squirrel videos on YouTube. Had to go to the store and get some stuff. So go outside. I open up the side door, because I use a walker to get around, to put that in the van. And as soon as that opens up, two squirrels come out from under my son's car. It's the next to me. And they sit there looking at me, and I'm going, oh, my God. And then they run off. One goes under that car, one goes under mine. And I'm going, okay, we got squirrels back.
That's
they heard
great.
a call or something. Why did that happen just that way? See, I don't believe in coincidences. There is really no such a thing. If you want to ignore spirit talking to you, if you want to ignore nature talking to you, yeah, it's just a coincidence.
Yeah, the nature, and once you start opening up to the messages and the communications it's really, really a lot of times delightful. I mean, we have so many stories of it. It's just mind-boggling. And it's easy to do. You really don't have to do anything. One of the things I'm amazed at, really, you just have to be like a little kid. Like kids are very open to nature normally, and they interact very easily and naturally with it. And that's about it. That's all you have. And then you can go from there and learn, more deeply. But everyone can do it. It's one of the easiest ways to connect to, if you want to look at even Kabbalah, is nature, is your connection to it, and begin to see that there is something there that wants to connect with you, whatever you want to call it. That's when I get a little annoyed at people that are too rigid with their logic, saying that, well, there's no proof there's God, I said, yeah, but there's no proof there isn't. And why don't you talk about that equally? And what is this, like the Asians have more of that sense of it being the Tao. I love that, that there is this energy that is very real.
Yeah, the connection is coming, but it's not yet to realize that space and energy and time and mass and whatnot, all of that stuff is conscious. That's the spirit point on the pentagram, and that's an aspect of you and me, and that's where we discover all of these mysteries of nature, if you will. And Kabbalah can assist in that process. So this is why, and the last thing I think I put on here, because we're going to be out of time here, was, the practical applications. So that paper I sent you this morning, it's kind of like when we're talking about the tree of life, that it's like a map of our interior spiritual kingdom, with its many latent or hidden interconnections with the rest of creation, right? And that's reality. So it is a master key, not just to unlock the arts of alchemy, astrology, and theurgy or magic. It will integrate them into a grand system of spiritual evolution and perfection. Our elders, in order to assist with our divine instruction, developed and incorporated into the tradition, specifically this one, a very elaborate system type of instruction book, which came to be known as tarot. And now you guys can take it and go on in class.
Oh no, we're not experts. We just love the systems together, like you do, and we certainly are excited to put our own ideas out there. But what's interesting, I mean, the thing that's impressed me is that one can make it your own in a sense through experience, and so there's this element of creativity with it that might just show a different angle, a different insight. And I know that Deanne Fortune and Crowley were really supportive of the idea that you make it your own, that in the end, it is the teacher. All these other books and systems are there to help open up that teacher. So going back to the beginning, that idea of having a direct connection to the divine. That's its ultimate really goal, I think. And that's why it's fascinating. And that it can work, like you said, with everybody.
Yeah, well, they didn't have typewriters, but that was the reason in the end of the 19th century, you had to hand copy all your papers. And that way it made more of an impression on you than just reading them.
That is true. When you copy notes, I still do that actually, but I grew up having to do that. So it's just a habit. But once you,
but I mean, this is all this stuff here, and you look at it and whatnot, and why did it come out when women's suffrage was to a point to where they were about to get the vote very shortly, and that who is it? Freud and his way of looking at the human mind and what we called psyche, which means soul and whatnot, was prevalent at that time. It's the same time the Golden Dawn kind of came up, and there was a major leak in this tradition, if you will. Up to that point, it had been pretty much esoteric.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the color scales didn't really come out until Crowley published them in 1910 in the Equinox.
Mm. So thinking about the tarot with Kabbalah and the artwork, is it fair to say that, of course, tarot is also a game, a card game, which is still played, and it's completely legitimate that it is. But one of the things that I have trouble with is there's so many decks that come out that have nothing to do with anything remotely at all with the tarot as a lineage, as sort of, it's so different, and it surprises me that people just immediately accept it. They don't question it. They don't say, is this really, part of the tarot? People make up even more cards and without any kind of reasoning, without any like, hey, I studied it and now I've had this, inspiration to do this.
Yeah, if you're going to do something different, you should have at least some kind of good reason for doing it.
You would
That's
think.
Me. That's me. So, the only thing that will maintain at least the base resonance for something like that is the fact that if they divide their deck up in the same way traditional tarot is divided up.
Meaning like the
two majors and the pip cards and the court cards, etc.
But it's interesting with so much going back to, I know you did that show on the egregores, and going back to the idea that this is what I've thought of with the lineage of the tarot, that if you do decide to use something that has a connection to that lineage, that has a thoughtful, it seems like you just get more out of it. That because then you're tapping into all of the other thoughts and all of the teachers that are wiser than I am, that have insights. It seems like people are missing out is how I would see it.
Yeah, see, there's where you go with a genuine initiate is looking at tapping into what went on before, because our predecessors, all of those who were genuine initiates and explorers of these other levels and aspects of consciousness, actually added to or perfected to a larger degree or caused to evolve all these other symbols that we tap into. And so you're right. Once you get into that, and again, like you said, with the egregore, you can tap into this other's experiential knowledge of this particular resonant pattern or point or whatever. I'm thinking like of the Mercury symbol, but it can be anything.
Right. Yeah, that's what's intriguing about it, I think.
Mm-hmm. And you can do that. If you can, this is where I try and encourage people, use your creativity, man. Go out here and take a look at this and, invent yourself a little way of working with this card. How would you do it? What would you see? And that, I think, is a good thing. And it encourages, A, their creativity, and B, it actually gives us more material or different ways of looking at this tradition, which keeps the tradition vital, healthy, alive,
That's a good point. It does seem like a tradition that's growing even more, really. It's not stagnant, and it's becoming more, I think, more people intrigued by it, it seems like. So kind of pulling people in. So you're right, it keeps it alive and dynamic. And that is one of the things that even the history seems to indicate, that Kabbalah has gone through different people grabbing it and looking at certain aspects of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, when you're talking about using it as a game, when you begin to see some of this stuff, all of a sudden it goes, okay. There used to be, some sets floated around the internet and whatnot, Enochian chess, okay? Had 4 different kinds of colors for the 4 elements and whatnot. But if we just drop that and say, no, that's very interesting, let's take a look at the very old, very, very popular chess game, okay? So now, chess is played on this grid of black and white squares. It's exactly 8 by 8. The number 8 happens to be Hod and is Mercury, right? The house of the alchemist. And so what you have is you have the pawns, and they actually represent the senses, according to Manly Hall. So there's like 3 extra senses beyond the 5 physical ones, or maybe 3 extra modes of sensing. And to do all of those 8 things. And then you have all of the pieces, and the ones that are on the queen side have a feminine quality. And all the ones on the king side have a masculine quality. So that, pieces can be removed from the board, but the king can never be captured. He can't be removed from the board because he represents spirit.
I never.
So now you get this idea about, hey, look at this, how mental this is, and how it looks at this and that. And if you begin to play with the energy that is cycling through this stuff depending upon the piece and where it is and so forth. You know, it's kind of like it reminds you of the theater that the gods from Olympus played with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
You can come in and begin to interpret this stuff. Same thing with I Ching. I mean, the trigrams, there can only be 8 of them between all solid and all broken. And the combinations in between, there can only be 8. And when you put those together, you get the 64 hexagrams, which just happens to be the number of the magic square of Mercury, right? So you can see there's more similarity and interconnection with these things, even though they grew up on different sizes of the planet.
And is the Thoth deck the only one that connects the I Ching to the tarot? I know Aleister Crowley has the I Ching in his cards. Are there other decks that do that?
There might be. I'm sure there probably are. There is a good book written by a gal on the I Ching in which she shows different aspects of the tradition and how it's very similar to the Western aspects of tradition.
Yeah, because I know in the Book of Thoth, he gives the explanation of with some of the cards, the I Ching, which I've always wanted to study more with his cards. I mean, it's such an amazing book, the I Ching and divination system, but I just haven't had the opportunity or the dedication yet to do that. So he puts so much in his deck. He's got it all: astrology, numerology, I Ching. So
yeah. You hear a story because we were involved with FLO, which was a stepchild of BOTA in their chapter work. That when Case had met Master R at the Waldorf Astoria, he had a tarot deck which was was crowded with a lot of symbology.
Oh,
He said we're like $10 and whatnot. At least that's the story. So I don't know.
who was Master R?
Master R is actually known to us as Prince Foucault or Comte de Saint-Germain. So he was supposedly the third order contact for Paul Foster Case and Anne Davies and Harriet Case, Paul's wife.
Oh, I never knew that.
Yeah, so they called him Master R, apparently, although some people say, they never called him this or that. I don't really care. The point is they had some very interesting conversations using a Ouija board that had a pentagram on one side of it, and they would have these Thursday night sessions in which Ann Davies and Paul Case would act as the priestess, and Harriet was the scribe. And they would ask questions, they would write stuff down. There would be books quoted from the other side, if you will, that are then written down. It was fascinating stuff.
I didn't know they used the Ouija board because that board is very controversial in the modern world.
Now that's why this one had a pentagram inscribed on the back.
And how long did they use it?
Even then, they would have some problems with communications either being clouded or broken altogether.
Interesting. We might need to do a show at some point on the esoteric uses of the Ouija board, because it's not the first story I've heard that's really interesting about how it was used by, more of an esoteric angle and used in a positive way, in a successful way.
I think the point is, because Ouija will work no matter what, is you want to be able to erect certain filters, barriers, and whatnot to only let certain kinds of influences through. And that's why there was a pentagram on the backside. That's not standard design if you buy a Ouija board,
Right. Well, thank you, Dan. We've come to the end of our time, and once again, it was really fascinating and interesting. We really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your experience and knowledge, and thank you very much.
I'm glad that I can still fascinate. Anyway,
I think you
enjoy this wonderful weather. Thank you to everybody else who watches and supports the program. I know it's greatly appreciated. So
thank
we'll
you
look
all
forward to the next installment.
Yes, indeed. So thank you all. Join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together, and have a beautiful week.